In a towering glass fortress where power and privilege dictate every move, a quiet figure slips unnoticed through the shadows, a black man cloaked in invisibility, bearing the weight of a world that refuses to see him beyond the surface. Every step he takes is met with cold dismissal, every glance a silent judgment. Yet beneath the uniform and the silence lies a storm brewing, a plan unfolding that will shake the very foundation of this empire. What happens when the man the company underestimated most is the one holding the key to its unraveling? Stay with this story to witness a journey of endurance, humiliation, and ultimate reckoning, one that forces the powerful to confront their own darkness. If this kind of gripping, thought-provoking drama pulls you in, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you think will happen next. Your voice matters in this conversation about justice and transformation. Calix Varelli, once the face of corporate dominance, now stood in the shadows of a glass tower that bore none of his legacy, dressed in a janitor's uniform 2 sizes too big. The laminated ID badge clipped to his chest bore the name Cleo Nesbitt, a name nobody in this building would recognize or respect. The disguise wasn't just a change in wardrobe, it was armor. A mask to shield him from the very men and women who wielded cruelty behind business cards and boardroom smirks. Syntrax's Global had been on his radar for months, not for acquisition, not yet, but for something much deeper. He'd read the complaints, the quiet whispers buried in exit interviews, the settlements swept under PR carpets. There was rot here. It festered behind clean glass and well-lit hallways. So he'd come not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but as a ghost no one would bother to look at twice. The night air bit cold as Calix approached the rear loading dock, where overnight staff entered unseen. He tapped his badge against the scanner. It buzzed red. Again. Still red. A security guard, a scrawny kid with a buzz cut and smug grin, leaned out of the booth and said, "Problem, buddy?" Calix, calm as ever, replied, "I was told to start on 5th floor maintenance tonight. First shift." The guard squinted at the badge. "That's not a usual route for newbies. You sure you didn't mean janitorial on B2? Calix offered a measured nod. That's what the assignment said. The kid buzzed him through with a shrug. "Whatever. Just don't wander." Inside, the lobby's artificial glow made everything feel sterile, soulless. As Calix pushed his janitorial cart through the lower hallway, he passed posters preaching corporate equality, stock photo smiles, slogans like "Respect starts with us." It almost made him laugh. Almost. On the elevator ride to the 5th floor, no one joined him. Most of the staff were gone, but cameras watched. He nodded at them as the doors opened to the executive suites. The floor was pristine, polished marble tiles reflecting overhead LEDs. Calix knelt by a stretch of hallway to begin scrubbing where his file said his duties lay. Moments in, 2 executives strolled out of a meeting room, laughing about bonuses and who they were replacing next quarter. They barely noticed him. One, mid-conversation, dropped an empty coffee cup without a glance. It rolled toward Calix's knee. No acknowledgement. He picked it up, disposed of it silently, and kept working. His gloves squeaked across glass doors. His mop whispered over stone. He remained unseen, unheard, invisible, until a woman in a navy pantsuit approached. Her heels clicked with intent. She was in her early 40s, tightly wound like every corporate climber in this building. Her eyes scanned him with scrutiny. "This floor isn't for janitorial shifts." "Who gave you clearance?" she asked. Calix stayed polite. "It's on the schedule, ma'am. 5th floor maintenance, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. She inspected his ID like it might explode. "Cleo Nesbitt," she read aloud, then narrowed her gaze. "Never heard of you." He nodded. "Just started." Her lips curled slightly. "Don't make this a habit." She turned and walked away. No greeting. No farewell. Just dismissal. Hours passed. He moved from hallway to lounge to break room. Each area carried the scent of synthetic lavender and elitism. One break room held an enormous decal on the wall. "We win together." As if unity were a product they'd patented. Around 1:30 a.m., Calix entered the main conference lounge, where 4 executives loitered around a poker table set up for late-night laughs. Brent Thorne was among them, tall, entitled, white, and never without a joke at someone's expense. Brent spotted Calix and called out, "Hey, you missed a spot earlier. The floor by my desk smells like your lunch." The others snickered. Calix kept his composure. Brent wasn't done. He approached with his drink, mock concern in his voice. "Wait, you're new, right? What's your name again?" Calix responded calmly, "Cleo." Brent tilted his head. "Cleo? That your real name or something off a detergent bottle?" More laughter. Then, with no warning, Brent tossed the contents of his cup, lukewarm espresso, onto the floor by Calix's feet. "Clean it." Now, Calix bent to do it, staying silent, the heat in his chest burning hotter than the stain on the floor. No, Brent added. "On your knees. We want to see dedication, Cleo." The air turned still. Brent looked around, goading others for approval. They didn't stop him. They didn't intervene. So Calix obeyed. He dropped to his knees, scrubbed with a hand towel, listening to their laughter above him. His pride bled into the cloth. When he finished, Brent clapped. "That's what I call team spirit. You're gonna fit in just fine here." Calix stood slowly, his jaw locked. But he said nothing. He would remember. Every word, every face. Later, while he cleaned the executive restrooms, the same voice echoed behind him. Brent again. "You missed a mirror," he said, pointing with his phone while recording. "Smile for the camera. Show future janitors how it's done." Calix froze, then nodded stiffly. Brent snickered and left. By 4:15 a.m., Calix's back ached. His uniform clung to him from sweat, and his knees were sore from kneeling on tile. He passed through the lobby, now empty save for flickering monitors showing internal employee chats. One message, thread read, "Who's the new guy? He looks lost." Another said, "Pretty sure he wandered from a loading dock." As he pushed his cart toward the freight elevators, the air in the loading dock felt heavier than the night before. A thick, chemical scent floated on the chill, bleach and fuel and faint mold from stagnant water. Tonight, the basement crew was already present. 3 other janitors stood at the edge of the garage bay, smoking and talking low. They paused as Calix arrived, exchanging glances that weren't friendly. One, a wiry man with a bandana tied low across his forehead, called out, "New guy's back. Must have enjoyed kissing the floor last night." Another man, stockier, with stained coveralls and a laugh that sounded like gravel being ground under boot heels, pointed at Calix's cart. "You bring a bib this time, Cleo? Wouldn't want you to spill anything important again." Calix didn't respond. He wheeled his cart into the corner near the maintenance sink and began filling a mop bucket. Before he could finish, a voice boomed from behind. "Verelli, I mean Nesbitt, what the hell is this?" It was Wilmer Clegg, the overnight supervisor. He was massive, bald-headed, and always sweating, even in the cold. Calix turned and faced him. "Just preparing the solution for my first assignment, sir." Clegg laughed, loud and mocking. "You think you're going to keep this floor clean, moving that slow? It's not a retirement gig. You mop like my grandma with arthritis." Calix held his tone level. "I can increase my pace." Clegg stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward the concrete. "Prove it. That spill's been there all day." Calix looked where he pointed and saw a dried, sticky patch near the edge of the garage, some kind of syrup or soda. He dipped the mop, wrung it out, and started working. Clegg watched him for about 15 seconds before barking. "Nope. Too slow." He reached over, grabbed the industrial hose mounted to the wall, twisted the handle, and sprayed the floor. The jet hit Calix's boots first, then his legs, then his chest. Water splashed everywhere. Calix stepped back, stunned. "Sir," he began. But Clegg just grinned and kept the hose aimed low. "Thought I'd help you loosen it up, plantation style." The others howled with laughter. Water pooled around Calix's feet, seeping into his uniform. He clenched his jaw and kept his arms at his sides. When Clegg finally turned the valve off, he tossed the hose to the ground and spat, "Pick up the pace next time, Cleo." As Calix turned away, drenched and dripping, he caught sight of a small red light blinking near the lockers. One of the other janitors had recorded the entire incident on his phone. Calix didn't acknowledge it. He resumed mopping, this time barefoot, having left his soaked shoes to dry near the drain. He worked until the floor gleamed, then emptied the bucket in silence. By midnight, he had made his way back up to the 5th floor, his wet socks squishing inside his boots. The cool air of the executive corridor sent a shiver through his spine. A notification buzzed through one of the overhead displays, a Slack message from the facility's humor thread. It read, "Midnight Mopper Meltdown," followed by a short video clip. It showed Calix getting hosed, water slapping against his knees, the sound of Clegg's laughter echoing. The clip had been edited with emojis and a booming sound effect when he flinched. He kept his gaze ahead, refusing to react. He finished wiping down the break room counters, each movement methodical. Every time he blinked, he saw the video replaying on the inside of his eyelids. At 1 a.m., a pair of young associates emerged from the tech division, heading to the coffee bar. They spotted him and stopped. One of them, a wiry blonde man with tortoiseshell glasses, whispered something to his friend and snorted. Loud enough for Calix to hear, he said, "Don't get too close. You'll end up on his highlight reel." The other added, "I think he's going for Employee of the Month. He's already the face of the meme page." They laughed. Calix straightened his back, nodded at them, and turned to clean the next area. By 2 a.m., he was summoned to the executive suite's private restroom. Apparently, someone had urinated across the stall floors and left a note on the mirror that read "Janitor's welcome mat." Calix said nothing. He grabbed gloves, knelt, and began cleaning. The cold tile chilled his skin even through the fabric. Behind him, footsteps clicked. It was Lacey Drummond. She leaned against the stall and watched him scrub. "Funny how you keep ending up in the filthiest jobs," she said. "Like fate wants to remind you where you belong." Calix didn't reply. She tilted her head and added, "Don't feel bad. Some people just weren't built for boardrooms. Better to be useful here, right?" Then she left, heels echoing like a countdown to something worse. At 3 a.m., while wiping down the exec coffee station, Brent Thorne appeared again. He grinned wide. "Look who's still scrubbing," he said, mock applause in his voice. "Did your plantation friend give you any tips?" Calix kept his hands moving. Brent leaned in, whispered, "You don't have to keep pretending. I know your type, hoping some exec notices you and pulls you up like a charity case." Calix kept wiping. Brent stepped back. "Don't worry. I won't say anything. Let you keep your dream for a while." Then, with deliberate cruelty, he spilled his coffee onto the floor and said, "Oops, guess I made a mess. Better get on it." By the time 5 a.m. rolled around, Calix was exhausted. His muscles ached. His spirit weighed down with the humiliation he had been forced to absorb without reply. Every word, every slight, every cold-eyed stare, it added bricks to the wall of injustice he was slowly building behind his silence. As the sun began to rise, he clocked out and walked to the same curb where his taxi waited. The city was still quiet, unaware that inside one of its shining towers, a man had suffered more than just a long night. He had endured degradation with purpose. The overnight janitorial team had not spoken to him directly since, but the way their glances lingered, the smirks they exchanged, the laughter that stopped when he entered a room, all of it confirmed the ridicule hadn't cooled. As he entered the loading dock, the same security guard from day one tossed him a neon yellow vest without making eye contact. "New policy. Wear this if you're cleaning restricted floors," the guard muttered. Calix caught it mid-air and unfolded it. The back was stenciled in bold black letters. "Restricted access. Support only." The symbolism was too loud to ignore. This wasn't a safety requirement. This was segregation rebranded as protocol. He slipped the vest on, its stiff material scratching his neck, and wheeled his cart toward the service elevator. Once inside, the elevator bypassed floors 1 through 4, stopping directly at 5. Before the doors fully opened, Calix's ears picked up the sound of muffled laughter coming from a hallway beyond. When the doors parted, he was greeted by a group of late-staying interns huddled near the break room, all clustered around a phone. One of them, a sharp-jawed man with expensive shoes and empty eyes, glanced up and snorted. "Hey Cleo, you've got fans," he said, waving his phone. You're up to 4,000 reactions. That mop twirl is legendary. Calix gave a brief nod, pushing forward with the cart, focusing on each step like he was navigating a minefield. His first task was the executive lounge. The smell of leftover steak, charred and heavy, clung to the air. Dishes had been abandoned mid-meal, as if the diners couldn't be bothered with even the illusion of cleanup. Calix worked through it, his gloves squeaking on crystal plates, the grime on the table already congealed from hours of neglect. As he cleaned, footsteps approached, slower, heavier, more deliberate. Quinn Roth, the VP of Facilities, entered the room without acknowledging him. She was a broad woman in a charcoal pantsuit, her hair pulled back into a severe bun, her mouth pinched with authority. She held a paper plate with a chunk of half-eaten steak dangling over its edge. Without breaking stride, she looked at Calix and said, "Missed a spot." Then, with no warning, she dropped the plate onto the floor at his feet. "But hey, free lunch," she added with a smirk. The plate bounced, steak flopping onto the floor like roadkill. Calix's stomach tightened. The interns outside the room cackled. Calix knelt, scooped the meat into a trash bag, and continued his work without a word. Every fiber in his body screamed for retribution, but his mission demanded restraint. This wasn't the time. Not yet. As Quinn exited, she glanced back. Next time, try seasoning it with actual respect. Then she was gone. By 2 a.m., the floor was quiet. Calix moved between offices, dusting surfaces, replacing trash bags, wiping windows. As he passed by Brent Thorne's office, he noticed a sticky note taped to the door with the words "Privilege at Work. Do not disturb," scribbled in Sharpie. He paused only for a moment, eyes narrowing, then kept walking. In the staff lounge, someone had scrawled on the whiteboard a crude caricature of a janitor on hands and knees, drawn with exaggerated features and labeled CEO of Trash Collection. It didn't take much imagination to know who it was meant to represent. Calix erased it with a towel and disinfectant, his face impassive. Moments later, a pair of female staffers entered. They took one look at him and whispered behind their coffee cups. One laughed. "Thought HR said they'd stop hiring for optics." The other replied, "Guess he's just here to keep the place from falling apart," symbolically. At 3:30 a.m., Calix made his way to the exit to dispose of a full garbage cart. The service corridor that led to the main refuse area was blocked with a fresh sign reading "Support exit only. Follow Route B." Route B led him outside, through the loading dock, past the dumpsters, into the alley. It was dark, it stank, and it was freezing. He maneuvered his cart through puddles of grease and discarded cardboard, rats skittering in his periphery. Halfway down the alley, a motion light flickered and caught movement above. One of the janitors from earlier stood by a break room window, phone in hand, recording. "Cinderella takes out the trash," he muttered to his coworker, who chuckled, sipping from a thermal mug. The red recording light glowed like an accusation. Calix looked straight into the lens, paused, then turned and resumed his task. Inside again, he passed Lacey Drummond's office just as she was exiting. She looked at his vest, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Nice color. They should add bells so we can hear you coming." Calix simply nodded. Lacey tilted her head. "You don't talk much, do you?" she asked. "Maybe you're smarter than you look." She stepped aside, letting him pass, then added, "Don't let Roth get too close. She doesn't like pets." Her voice was coated in something slicker than sarcasm, contempt lacquered with false concern. At 4:45 a.m., Calix was tasked with polishing the elevator chrome. As he worked, the same intern from earlier approached with a friend, both carrying smoothies. "So Cleo," the first one said, "if you had to guess, how long before you break?" "Like mentally." The second added, "I say 2 weeks. Tops. These floors eat people like you alive." They clinked cups and walked off, their laughter trailing behind them like static. When his shift finally ended, Calix stood in the sub-level break room, the fluorescent light above him humming. He stripped off the vest and stared at the restricted access print. He folded it carefully and placed it back on the hook, then washed his hands, scrubbing them longer than necessary. But this time, the card beeped and blinked red. A second attempt yielded the same result. The security guard, a new one this shift with a more indifferent demeanor than the last, peered through the glass booth and shrugged. "Says you're not in the system," he muttered. "Calix, remain calm. I've been scheduled for 5th floor cleaning all week. There must be a mistake." The guard scanned the badge himself, shook his head, and said, "Nothing I can do. You're not listed anywhere." Calix exhaled. He knew better than to push. After a call to the overnight supervisor, Wilmer Clegg, the security guard buzzed him through with a roll of his eyes. "Better hope you're not trespassing, Cleo," he added, almost amused. Once inside, Calix avoided the elevators and used the maintenance stairwell to reach the 5th floor, uncertain how far the sabotage extended. When he arrived, he found his usual supply closet locked and his janitorial cart missing. Minutes later, Lacey Drummond stepped out of the hallway kitchen, her eyes widening in mock surprise. "Still showing up?" she asked, sipping from a blue-tinted thermos. "Impressive. We were starting to place bets." Calix didn't answer. Instead, he headed for the IT wing to find a spare broom. He pushed open the door to the server corridor, intending only to cut through, but as soon as he stepped in, the door slammed shut behind him with an audible magnetic lock engaging. He reached for his badge and tapped it on the interior scanner. Nothing. The reader glowed red again. Locked in. The room was cold, buzzing with low-frequency whirs from racks of humming servers. The lights overhead were motion-triggered and dimmed quickly, leaving him in partial shadow. Calix moved to the emergency call panel, only to find it deactivated, tampered with. He checked his phone. No signal. Inside that metal corridor, he was completely isolated. Hours passed. He sat on the floor, using his vest as padding against the freezing tile, trying to remain still to conserve heat. The hours dragged as the clock on the wall ticked toward 3 a.m. unbeknownst to him. At that very moment, an internal group chat among a handful of executives was active. Brent Thorne had posted a gif of a ghost and captioned it, "Anyone seen our favorite janitor? Hope he's not haunting the boardroom again." Lacey had added he probably ran home after Roth tossed him dinner. Quinn chimed in last, "Let him vanish. The floors are cleaner without the drama." They didn't know he was trapped just below them, collecting every name, every insult, every digital fingerprint. Eventually, a junior IT analyst happened to pass the server corridor and noticed Calix sitting against the glass, looking exhausted. The analyst unlocked the door, startled. "How long have you been in there?" Calix stood slowly, stretching his legs. "A while," he said simply, then walked out without another word. He didn't report the incident. He had learned there was no justice here, only evidence, only patterns. The more they revealed themselves, the more he documented silently. But the building wasn't done humiliating him. Just an hour after being freed, he was cleaning the east hallway restrooms when a young woman from marketing passed by. She glanced at him briefly, and he nodded once, a polite acknowledgement. She looked away. Moments later, a message came through his work-assigned device instructing him to report to HR immediately. At the HR office, the air felt like a courtroom. Two representatives sat behind a long desk, one typing rapidly while the other spoke in clipped, rehearsed tones. "Mr. Nesbitt, we've received a complaint regarding inappropriate behavior," the woman began. "It's been alleged that you made an employee feel unsafe in a professional setting." Calix's expression remained neutral. What specific behavior is being referenced? The male HR rep looked at the screen, then back at Calix. "You stared at her for too long and made a suggestive nod." Calix blinked. I nodded once, as a greeting. The woman leaned forward. Intent is difficult to prove, but perception is everything in maintaining a safe workplace. No witness, no context, no questions to verify the event, just a blank incident report form and an assumption of guilt. Calix was asked to sign a document acknowledging the warning. When he hesitated, they reminded him, non-compliance may result in termination. So he signed, not because he was guilty, not because he was afraid, but because every word on that form, every detail of that conversation, would feed the final reckoning he was preparing. Upon returning to his shift, Brent passed him in the hallway and offered a mocking thumbs up. Heard HR gave you a talk. Tough world out there for heartthrobs. Calix didn't flinch. He simply moved on. It was a show, a glittering parade meant to impress, and every department had been ordered to look flawless. Even the cleaning staff had received stricter uniforms and new protocols. Calix arrived to find his locker marked with a passive-aggressive sticker that read "Image Matters." Inside, folded precisely, was a starched janitorial shirt embroidered with "Courtesy Crew" across the chest in silver thread. The irony stung. His badge had finally been reactivated, but the damage from the prior shift lingered. His name still floated among internal threads, and the HR warning, though baseless, was now a stain on his phantom record. Nonetheless, he dressed in silence and reported to 5th floor. There, Wilmer Clegg met him with a clipboard and a sneer. "Investor Wing, VIP Suite. Don't screw it up," he barked, handing Calix a checklist of tasks that were clearly impossible to complete alone in the time allotted. "Oh, and stay out of sight when the tour arrives. You don't exactly scream branding." Calix nodded without speaking and rolled his cart toward the executive conference hall. The room was massive, sleek walls of glass, a table made of polished stone, designer lighting fixtures dangling like art from the ceiling. As he set to work, he noted the layout. The table was already lined with crystal flutes, silver trays, and nameplates of executives, among them Quinn Roth, Lacey Drummond, and Brent Thorne. He began polishing the stone surface, careful not to shift anything. Shortly before midnight, the guests began to arrive. Calix retreated to the periphery, wiping down the outer glass while keeping a low profile. The investors were a collection of sharp-dressed individuals flanked by Syntraxis's senior leadership, all grinning with artificial warmth. As Brent conducted a welcome spiel about corporate transparency and diversity, Calix continued cleaning near the bar cart, where Quinn Roth stood pouring champagne. She spotted him, her lip curling slightly in disdain. As Brent turned the presentation over to a projected deck on the wall, Quinn casually strolled toward the table, flute in hand. Then, with a graceful twist of her wrist, she tripped, spilling half a glass of champagne directly onto the carpet beside Brent's chair and beneath the conference table. The liquid dripped down the polished edge in slow motion. She let out an exaggerated gasp. "Oh no, what a mess," she said. Then louder, "Custodial, we need cleanup under the table, please." Every head turned. Calix stepped forward, trying to keep his composure. He knelt near the puddle, already soaked into the fibers. No, under," Quinn clarified, pointing beneath the long glass table where executives still sat with legs crossed, notes in hand, and their attention now split between the screen and him. "We can't have our guests see stains," she added. There was no elegant way to do it. Calix had to crawl under the table, weaving between designer heels and polished loafers, cloth in hand, wiping the spill in silence as flashes of camera phones clicked quietly from the sidelines. The air under the table was stifling. Every executive tried not to look, but their posture shifted slightly, leaning back in their chairs as though his presence might contaminate them. Brent chuckled quietly. One of the investors whispered something to Lacey, who smirked. Once the spill was cleaned, Calix crawled backward, careful not to brush against anyone's shoes, and stood with the practiced dignity of a man who'd learned how to be invisible without crumbling. He nodded once to Quinn, who said, "Thank you," in a tone meant for dogs and drones. The moment was over, or so it seemed. Calix left the room, pushed his cart toward the far hallway, and waited for the meeting to end. He felt the heat rising in his face, the burn of shame eclipsed only by the cold purpose inside him. But Syntraxis wasn't done. By 2 a.m., an email was sent to every internal employee with the subject line, "Knowing our place. Corporate commitment to team roles." Attached was a fake motivational poster featuring a photo, taken from under the table, of Calix in his vest and uniform mid-crawl. His head was down, one hand extended with a rag, the champagne spill reflecting like gold in the carpet. Above the image in bold impact font was the caption, "Know your lane." The photo had been altered further. His cleaning cloth was replaced with a silver tray, and someone had added a top hat and bow tie to his uniform, turning him into a caricature of a groveling butler. The internal response was instant. Reactions range from laughing emojis to LOL threads in regional team channels. Even Brent chimed in, replying, "Promotion pending." Calix saw the email pop up on his assigned device as he wiped fingerprints from the lounge windows. He opened it, stared, closed it, took a slow breath. He didn't delete it. Instead, he forwarded it to a secure backup address only he knew about. Documentation. Just after 3 a.m., Calix encountered the same intern who had mocked him days before. The kid held up his phone, showing the meme, and said, "You're a legend now. Seriously, I've never seen anyone lean into the role like you." Calix asked nothing, said nothing. He simply kept walking. The intern followed briefly, then lost interest. The laughter, the backhanded praise, the way no one spoke to him directly, but everyone talked about him as if he were background scenery. It was a new kind of humiliation, one designed not to beat him down physically, but to erase his humanity entirely, to turn him into content. Quinn Roth passed him in the elevator later that morning. She gave him a glance, tapped the screen of her phone twice, and said, "You clean up better than you look. Next time, try to be less distracting." Calix nodded. Inside, something twisted tighter. The embarrassment from the previous night's champagne stunt had metastasized. The meme of him crawling like a servant beneath a conference table was now printed on actual mugs circulating around the building. He spotted one in the hand of a copy assistant near the 5th floor elevators, white ceramic, bold text, "Know your lane," and his own bent-over silhouette immortalized in comic form. He didn't react. He never did. But his silence, once mistaken for ignorance, was now being interpreted as compliance, or worse, submission. And Syntraxis's culture knew how to escalate when it smelled submission. The night began with a mandatory team huddle in the loading dock, a new policy implemented for optics. Wilmer Clegg conducted the meeting like a drill sergeant, calling names and barking orders. When he reached Calix, he paused dramatically. "Mr. Nesbitt, our celebrity," he said. "Hope you remembered your script tonight." Laughter rolled through the garage. "VIPs aren't in tonight, so you'll be cleaning B-level garage and support offices. Oh, and Roth wants a word with you now." Calix reported to Quinn Roth's glass-walled office, the artificial lights above making the space feel like a surgical theater. She stood behind her desk, tapping her fingers against a silver tablet. "Cleo," she said, voice syrupy and sharp, "I'm going to say this once. There is no tolerance for drama in this building. You've made yourself into a distraction. That meme? I don't care who made it. But if you so much as raise your hand in complaint, I'll have you escorted out, no paycheck, no signature, no fuss. And not through the front doors." She leaned forward, her eyes hardening. "You're lucky to even have a broom here. If you want to test that luck, there's a windowless van outside that moves very quietly." Calix met her gaze, nodded slowly, and said, "Understood." She smiled, falsely satisfied. "Good. Then clean up that oil leak in the lower lot. I want it done before sunrise." He descended to B-level, past the executive fleet of vehicles. The night air down there reeked of gasoline and burnt rubber. As he scrubbed an oil stain near the far column, he heard a door open behind him. It was a group of administrative staff returning from a late team dinner, still tipsy and high on self-importance. Among them was Eleanor Keene, the executive assistant to the VP of Communications, a young woman who thrived on proximity to power and liked to punch down for laughs. She spotted Calix, turned to her group, and said, "Oh my God, guys, look who's doing the oil change. Should we tip?" Her friends giggled. One of them whispered something, and Eleanor's eyes lit up with mischief. She walked over, holding a large garbage bag that had been meant for disposal, but now served a different purpose. Without a word, she appended the bag over Calix's head, dumping a cascade of office trash, half-eaten sandwiches, crumpled reports, sticky coffee cups, directly onto his shoulders and face. A banana peel landed on his neck. "Happy birthday, janitor," she said. The others burst into laughter. Someone recorded. Someone else clapped. Calix stood perfectly still, trash sliding off his back onto the concrete. His vest was now stained with grease, crumbs, and insult. He didn't flinch. He didn't wipe it away. He looked up at Eleanor, his expression neutral, and said quietly, "Is that all?" She blinked, perhaps expecting anger, a yell, a reaction. But his restraint unnerved her more than any outburst might have. "Whatever," she said, turning on her heel. "Go get a mop or something." He walked to the maintenance closet, tried to clean himself up, but the sink only had cold water and paper towels. There was no change of clothes, no empathy. The cameras caught everything, of course. But at Syntraxis, cameras were only tools for leverage, not protection. He returned to work, soaked in shame and the scent of rot, and finished his tasks in silence. At 2 a.m., Brent strolled through the hallway where Calix was vacuuming. He stopped, looked him up and down, and laughed. "Did a trash can throw up on you?" he asked. "Dude, you're becoming a mascot." He pulled out his phone, snapped a picture, and walked off. Calix continued vacuuming, the motor humming like a heartbeat. Later that shift, as he entered the staff lounge to empty the waste baskets, he found that someone had taped a new version of the meme onto the fridge. This time, it was his face photoshopped onto a cartoon rat sweeping a sidewalk with the tagline, "Be the best at what you're told." Beneath it, someone had scrawled in red marker, "Promotion, rat supervisor." At 4 a.m., he passed Lacey Drummond in the main hallway. She wrinkled her nose as he walked by. "You smell like yesterday," she said. "Maybe take pride in your hygiene, if not your job." Calix paused and said, "Thank you for the advice," in the most even tone he could muster. She rolled her eyes and left him standing there, dripping and dismissed. With 30 minutes left in the shift, Calix was ordered to clean the executive locker room. Inside, he found towels soaked in mud and deliberately smeared across the tile. A note on the wall read, "Guess who gets to clean this up?" in Sharpie. He picked up each towel, scrubbed every surface, and when it was done, he stood in the middle of the room for a full minute, breathing slowly, centering himself. The building's bowels felt colder, but Calix no longer noticed the temperature. He had reached the point where humiliation was no longer a surprise, where insults were background noise, and where silence became a weapon honed with every chore he endured. After clocking in, he returned to his locker and found something new, something unexpected. A plain manila envelope taped to the inside of the metal door. There was no name, no note, no sender. Just a USB drive inside, clipped to a folded sheet of paper. He looked around the locker room, empty, quiet, then slipped the envelope into the inside pocket of his vest. The paper was blank on one side. On the other, typed in a monospace font, were just 5 words, "They're watching. So am I." He waited until he was alone in the 5th floor staff lounge and slipped the USB into one of the spare terminals usually used to check maintenance schedules. The files loaded instantly. Security footage, dozens of clips, all time-stamped and labeled by incident. One showed Brent Thorne laughing as he poured coffee on Calix's boots. Another captured the exact moment Quinn, Wacth, sprayed him with water in the basement. Yet another showed the executive assistant dropping a trash bag over his head while her friends filmed and laughed. The footage was sharp, angles clean, audio crisp. Whoever sent it had access, and a reason. He copied the contents to a secure personal server using the building's own network, encrypted it, and ejected the drive. No emotion showed on his face, but inside, something deep and dormant stirred. These weren't just memories now. They were facts. The rest of the shift began uneventfully. The investors had departed the day before, and most staff were gone early. His first task was trash removal on level 6, a section usually reserved for software dev leads and internal systems analysts. As he emptied bins, cleaned keyboards, and polished elevator rails, he overheard 2 analysts chatting in the hallway. "Did you hear about the badge glitch?" one said. The other replied, "Yeah. Some low-level guy got executive lounge access. Total meltdown upstairs. Rots flipping out. HR's calling it a systems hiccup." Calix's hand paused briefly on the disinfectant bottle. An hour later, he approached the executive elevator to deliver a new shipment of microfiber cloths, just part of the night's protocol. His badge was supposed to restrict him to service corridors only. But when he tapped it against the reader outside the main elevator doors, the panel blinked green. Access granted. Calix didn't flinch. He stepped in, pressed the button for the top floor, and waited. The elevator climbed in silence. When the doors opened to the executive lounge, a sleek, chrome-finished sanctuary complete with leather chairs and a floor-to-ceiling view of the city skyline, he stepped inside calmly. The room was empty, save for two junior partners preparing drinks at the wet bar. They turned at the sound of the door and froze when they saw him. One of them dropped a tumbler. "You can't be up here," the taller one said. "This floor is restricted." Calix said nothing. He walked to the table, placed the microfiber shipment down neatly, and turned to leave. By the time he returned to the lower floors, the incident had already triggered internal chatter. His work tablet buzzed with a message from HR. "Unauthorized access recorded. Please report to room 303 for review." But there was no follow-up, no escort, no security alert, just confusion. Someone up high was panicking, but too uncertain to act. Later that night, in the maintenance break room, Wilmer Clegg confronted him, eyes narrowed. "You messing with systems now, Nesbit?" he asked, stepping close. "You don't look like a hacker, but I swear, one more screw-up and you'll be gone." Calix looked up from his cart and replied, "I go where I'm allowed." His tone was calm, deliberate. Clegg stared at him, unsure whether it was defiance or compliance. He backed off, muttering, "Stay in your lane." But lanes were already blurring. As Calix passed through the central stairwell later in the shift, Lacey Drummond appeared at the top of the landing, pausing when she saw him. "Heard you visited the lounge," she said, feeling brave. Calix met her gaze. "Just doing my job." She tilted her head, voice dropping. "Keep pushing, Cleo, and you'll find yourself permanently restructured." Then she disappeared through the door. By 4 a.m., Brent was prowling the halls, drunk on after-hours whiskey, muttering curses, and storming in and out of meeting rooms. He caught sight of Calix near the break room and stomped toward him. "You think you're smart," he hissed. "You think you're gonna outmaneuver this place? You're nothing here." He poked Calix in the chest. "I don't care what your little badge stunt was. You're here to clean, not cause panic." Calix didn't move. "Then let me clean," he said. Brent stared at him, rage flickering behind his eyes. But something in Calix's calm shook him. He turned and stalked off. He walked in, as he always did, clad in his uniform, vest zipped tight, eyes steady, movements exact. Yet tonight, he no longer felt like a ghost. He felt like a storm waiting to declare itself. Brent Thorne had been pacing since late evening, visibly agitated. His bravado fractured by something he couldn't name, but felt pressing against his confidence like a crowbar under foundation stone. Calix observed him from the shadows of the corridor, pushing his cart slowly past Brent's office. The door was open, and Brent was leaning over a desk with his phone in one hand and a drink in the other. Hours passed before opportunity presented itself. At 2:17 a.m., Calix was instructed to clean the main executive boardroom after an emergency strategy session. The space was dimly lit, glass walls reflecting the skyline and the towering egos of its occupants. Brent entered halfway through the cleaning shift, still drunk from the night before, muttering something about optics and board instability. He didn't notice Calix at first, only catching his silhouette in the window reflection as he passed. But when Calix straightened up and turned slightly, so that the overhead light illuminated the side of his face, Brent froze. The janitor's eyes weren't meek anymore. They were steady, knowing, dangerous. "Something wrong, Mr. Thorne?" Calix asked, not in the rehearsed, low-servant tone he had used for the past week, but in his real voice. Clear, deep, authoritative. A voice that had once closed billion-dollar deals and dismantled monopolies with a single phrase. Brent stepped back, eyes narrowing, trying to place it. What did you say?" he asked. Calix tilted his head. "I said, is something wrong?" The boardroom's reflective glass caught Brent's face and twisted it, showing fear masked in confusion. Calix stepped forward, standing just beside the massive table he had once been forced to crawl under. "You've been very vocal about lanes," he added. "Curious how quickly yours is narrowing." Brent's expression shifted into panic. "Who are you?" he asked, voice strained. Calix didn't answer. He picked up his mop, turned slowly, and exited the room. Minutes later, Brent was in Lacey Drummond's office, sweating. "It's him," he said. "It's not just some janitor. It's him." Lacey raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Brent ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know. But his face. I've seen him before. His voice. He's not who we think he is." At 3:40 a.m., the fire alarm rang, a scheduled drill that HR had sent out the previous week. Everyone was expected to evacuate to the primary assembly point in the East Plaza. Calix moved with the crowd, blending in as always. But this time, instead of heading to the janitorial collection point near the back of the lot, he made a turn, subtle but deliberate, toward the center group. Executives were already gathered, phones in hand, whispering, annoyed. Quinn Roth stood near the marshal, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her impatience despite the darkness. Calix walked through them, past Quinn, past Brent, past Lacey. Not fast, not slow, with purpose. Several people turned as he moved, watching him with uncertain expressions. Then, at the marshal's checkpoint, he stopped. The crowd quieted as he pulled off his ID badge, flipped it over, and handed it to the marshal. "This is no longer accurate," he said. "Please record the following information. Calix Varelli, founder of Redridge Capital, majority stakeholder in V3 Holdings, temporary custodian at Syntraxis Global under investigation of internal malpractice." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Brent stepped forward, his face drained of color. "This is some joke," he stammered. "You're lying. Varelli's in New York or Geneva or some..." Calix turned to him. "Geneva was last month. New York was last quarter. And I've been here, watching, enduring, recording, every comment, every memo, every violation of human dignity your team executed while hiding behind corporate immunity." Lacey stepped back. Quinn's jaw tensed. The marshal, stunned, asked for identification. Calix reached into his inner pocket and produced a secondary badge, gold-trimmed, marked V3 Holdings, founding partner. The logo matched one of Syntraxis' silent investors, the one no one ever met, but whose funds were responsible for nearly 30% of the company's liquidity. Quinn spoke finally, her voice cutting through the silence like broken glass. "Why?" Calix's voice was steady. "Because justice begins where cruelty thinks it ends. Because power unchecked creates rot. And because people like you think uniforms define worth." Security personnel approached, not to detain Calix, but to protect him. Internal security logs had shifted. Emails had been flagged. The very infrastructure of Syntraxis' internal chain of command was now uncertain. People who mocked him yesterday now avoided eye contact. But this time, Calix was not merely allowed, he was expected. When he arrived at the executive lobby, he wore a tailored black jacket over his cleaned janitorial uniform. The very same vest still draped across his chest like a reminder. His face was composed, but his presence burned through the sterile air like a blade through gauze. At his side was a slim black briefcase that held more weight than its size implied. The boardroom was already half full when he entered. Brent was pacing near the window, red-eyed and jittery. Lacey sat rigidly at the table, her jaw clenched, eyes darting from screen to screen. Quinn Roth stood in the corner, arms folded tight across her chest, flanked by a silent Wilmer Clegg, whose face was locked in a blank mask of performative calm. Seated across from them were two attorneys representing V3 Holdings, 3 internal legal advisors, 2 HR directors, and a silent observer from the Investor Oversight Committee. Calix moved to the head of the table without invitation. Nobody objected. He set the briefcase down, opened it slowly, and pulled out a single black binder labeled Internal Conduct Report, 09D CV. Then he clicked a small remote. The lights dimmed. A monitor behind him came to life, displaying footage. Quinn Roth hosing him down in the basement, smirking as the water drenched him. Lacey's voice echoing in a hallway as she mocked his smell and appearance. Brent shoving a trash can over near his feet. Eleanor Keene dumping garbage over his head as a group of assistants laughed. Wilmer Clegg muttering, plantation still hiring, as he threw gloves on the floor. Each clip was time-stamped. Each face was clear. Calix let the video run uninterrupted for 5 minutes. No narration, no commentary, just facts on screen. When it ended, silence gripped the room like a vice. He closed the binder, then placed 6 individual copies in front of key seats. The documentation includes 36 recorded instances of harassment, 10 OSHA violations for falsified HR reports, and 2 coordinated defamation campaigns, one involving internal Slack messages shared across departments. Each incident has been indexed with footage, witness statements, and network metadata tracing origin and distribution. Brent sputtered, This is all out of context. Half of it's jokes, memes. Nobody meant harm. Calix raised a hand. There is no context that makes racial slurs, workplace violence, and dehumanization acceptable, he said. This isn't about jokes. It's about a culture you've all nurtured. Quinn stepped forward, voice low. You manipulated your way into this building under false pretenses. That's grounds for dismissal. Calix looked her dead in the eye. False pretenses? No. Strategic audit. Authorized by my own equity. Every signature here, he pointed to the compliance clearance, was valid. I invested in Syntraxis under a proxy holding company to examine corporate health. What I found was rot, led by the very people responsible for its appearance of shine. The HR lead, a woman named Margot Barnes, opened her folder. These documents align with whistleblower protocols outlined in the Employee Protection Clause 14.1. If even half of this is verified, and we believe it already has been, immediate suspensions are mandatory while formal review proceeds. Brent stood, red-faced. You can't suspend me. I'm on the Strategic Growth Committee. The legal counsel, a silver-haired man with decades of courtroom fatigue in his eyes, replied flatly, Not anymore. Your access has already been revoked. Lacey looked around, eyes wide. Wait, you can't just erase us overnight. I've built every comms campaign Syntraxis runs. This isn't some amateur uprising. It's corporate mutiny. Quinn remained still, her mouth tightening into a straight line. You set the fire, Calix said calmly. Now you're choking on the smoke. Margot reached into her satchel and handed each executive a formal suspension notice. Effective immediately, you are relieved of all duties pending review. Any attempts to interfere with ongoing investigations will result in permanent termination and legal pursuit for obstruction. Security personnel entered the room without fanfare. They stood quietly at the rear, not aggressive, simply present. Brent looked like he might faint. Lacey turned pale. Wilmer clenched his fists. Only Quinn seemed to hold her composure. So what's the end game, Virelli? She asked coldly. You want our jobs? You want to bankrupt Syntraxis? Calix shook his head. I want accountability. And more than that, I want culture redefined. This company preaches innovation, but practices degradation. It will either evolve or collapse, but it will never return to what it was. 12 months later, Syntraxis Global bore no resemblance to the cold, corrosive institution it had once been. The building still stood in downtown Los Angeles, steel and glass shimmering in the Californian sun, but within its walls, every protocol, every structure, every cultural underpinning had undergone a transformation so complete that walking through its halls felt like entering a completely new organism, one that had shed its parasitic habits in favor of something sustainable, something restorative. The lobby was no longer segregated by silent status. Employees of all roles, whether custodians, coders, or executives, passed one another with acknowledgement, if not respect. The old employee handbook, once a dense tome of loopholes and legalese, had been replaced by the Syntraxis Code of Equity, a living document co-authored by cross-departmental teams, including those once considered invisible. And in the heart of this new organism stood Calix Virelli, no longer wearing a janitor's vest, but not dressed like a king either. His suit was simple, dark gray with a black collar, unbranded, with no need to remind people who he was. Everyone already knew. The man who exposed the rot, who absorbed humiliation with purpose, who turned disgrace into revolution, had now built a corporate ecosystem that prioritized transparency, humanity, and justice, not just as buzzwords, but as embedded operations. Yet the most remarkable part wasn't his leadership. It was the four people he had once called enemies, now transformed not by punishment alone, but by responsibility. Calix had made a controversial decision following their suspension. He chose not to permanently banish Quinn Roth, Brent Thorne, Lacey Drummond, or Wilmer Clegg. After internal debates and board votes, he implemented a conditional return program, what he called the Reckoning Clause. It stated that any former executive who had directly contributed to Syntraxis's prior toxicity could return only if they accepted a role 3 levels below their previous station, participated in a year-long reform curriculum, and publicly documented their journey through corporate-sponsored transparency forums. To many, it sounded like humiliation disguised as reform. But to Calix, it was about constructing bridges between destruction and growth. Not every one of them accepted. Eleanor Keene left immediately, her pride too thick to see past the offer. But Quinn stayed. Brent hesitated, then agreed. Lacey returned under silent protest. Wilmer signed his contract without a word and began his first shift in logistics inventory 3 days later. Now 1 year later, Quinn Roth worked in the Employee Relations Department under a manager 20 years her junior. Her office was modest, her duties procedural, handling grievances, reviewing misconduct claims, learning what it meant to listen without power. Her posture had softened. She spoke less, but when she did, it was with weight and consideration. She no longer barked orders, but asked questions. During a monthly town hall, she stood before the company and said, "I used to believe efficiency meant domination, that silence meant compliance. But the truth is, the best systems are built on voices, not walls." She looked directly at Calix as she said it, and he nodded in acknowledgement. Brent Thorne had taken a role in the mentorship initiative for first-generation employees, an ironic but purposeful placement. At first, he treated the position with indifference, making jokes, trying to reassert dominance in small ways. But the young men and women he worked with weren't afraid of him. They called out his sarcasm, demanded clarity, and slowly reshaped him. One night, after walking a mentee through a conflict resolution strategy, Brent stayed behind in the common area and stared at a mural newly painted on the east wall. It depicted a janitor pushing a mop made of fire, burning away old rules. Another staffer approached him and said, "You were part of that, weren't you?" Brent didn't deny it. He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "but I'm trying to be part of what comes next." Lacey Drummond returned to Syntraxis as a digital content editor, a mid-level role with no staff beneath her. She struggled at first, her emails less sharp, her reports slow. But over time, she began using her communication skills to spotlight initiatives focused on workplace dignity. Her writing style shifted. No longer slick slogans or PR spin. Now it was stories of change, essays on self-awareness, editorials on how the old culture nearly cost them everything. In one blog post titled The Reflection, she wrote, "We were mirrors that only showed our own power. Now, I see the people we once ignored. And in seeing them, I've started seeing myself again." Wilmer Clegg, perhaps the hardest to reach, had taken a role in internal compliance. It wasn't glamorous. He reviewed forms, checked safety reports, and sat in workshops led by the very people he once mocked. He never spoke much, but his eyes followed every conversation. Over time, he began pulling aside new custodial staff and asking if they needed better supplies or more break time. Once, during a lunch break, Calix found Wilmer sitting alone in the backlot, looking at the city skyline. He sat beside him. Wilmer didn't look over. He just said, "I thought fear kept people in line. I never realized it just builds prisons you can't escape from yourself." Calix didn't respond right away. Then he said, "Recognition is the first door. Walking through it takes everything." That was enough. The two men sat in silence, no longer as enemies, but as builders of something neither could have imagined a year before. Syntraxis became a case study in corporate ethics programs, cited in white papers and business school lectures not just for its reforms, but for its willingness to confront failure without erasure. Employees had the right to challenge, to voice, to rise. People no longer whispered about Calix Varelli. They listened when he spoke, but more importantly, they emulated the systems he'd seeded. He was not the tyrant they feared, nor the savior they expected. He was the architect of accountability. And in a world obsessed with retribution, he had chosen something harder: redemption. One evening, after walking through a mentorship session and reviewing quarterly culture reports, Calix paused in the newly rebuilt janitorial wing. The vest he once wore had been framed behind glass, not as mockery, but as a reminder. Above it was etched a line he had written in the first policy draft: "We rise not through title, but through truth." He stood there alone for a moment, then turned and walked back into the company he had transformed. Proof that power doesn't corrupt, people do. And people, when forced to see themselves, can choose to be more. The end. Thanks for reading all the way through. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking and subscribing for more gripping, intense narratives like this. I'd love to hear what you think about the plot. Did the twist surprise you? How did you feel about the characters' journeys? Also, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how stories connect with people around the world. Your feedback helps shape future stories, so don't be shy.